Hi, everybody. I'm Scott, and thanks for joining me again today for another episode of the podcast in support of the film Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier. I'm here with Larry Becker once again, and we figure while we're all sitting here stressing and worrying about our families stuck in the LA fires right now, that we might as well tell some more stories and at least try and lighten the mood for a couple of moments while we wait minute by minute to see how everybody's doing. So we wish everybody in that LA situation the best, and we're thinking of you, obviously. So here's where I want to start today. And since we just mentioned the fire and what people may or may not lose and holding on to each other, let's start with some family stories. So here, I'll give you one first, and when I say family, I mean parents of people who worked at Evans. In fact, mine has to do with your father. So I will never forget my trips to New York buying when your dad was in charge. And I was very young at the time. I guess I was Larry's assistant. So yeah, your dad was still there. It was either that or when it was in Chicago. I'm pretty sure it was LA. And you used to go in and people would say, how the other buyers and whatnot would try to influence your purchasing decisions. And you guys need this in LA, and you guys need that in LA, and you guys need this, and you guys need that. And I remember one time my grandfather was also there, Harold Sussman, buying for the Coslows chain. And when he picked something, he turned to Larry Friedman and I, and said, this would be good for you guys too. And some of the younger buyers poo-pooed him. There was like some Snickers in the room. And at the break, I don't remember where Larry went off to, but your dad, Paul Becker, called me over. This was one of my early lessons as a kid. He called me over and he said, just so you know, listen to the people who know. And he was pointing towards my grandfather and Jerry Dupler and all the older guys. So there you go. Your dad.
Well, there's definitely a lot of truth to the fact that my dad always spoke his mind, but I think the most important thing to him was trying to be a mentor to the young people around him. And yeah, he really did good advice. I mean, I tell you what, we both grew up through the industry and through the buying eyes. I was on both sides, you were on both sides. And, at the end of the day, there's one thing that I did always learn is that, and Evans was brilliant. I learned it, of course, from Evans. They were brilliant in the fact of their inclusion of management. And it wasn't always only upper management. They brought in, department managers so that they could see the buying process and, more important, be part of the buying process. And there's one thing that I always discovered, because most of my career at Evans and even afterwards was producing the collection for the people to make their selection. I wasn't making their selection. I was producing the best collection that was maybe not always so generic. I mean, I would add, my bit and influence the collection maybe a little bit with some of my thoughts. But again, as my father said, I think I knew a little bit too. It's osmosis that, you learn this stuff. Like I told you before, the fur business is pretty easy.
Yep.
Once you retain the information, it's not going to change.
Right. Yep.
So the one thing that I do, I mean, I've witnessed and I believe in, is when you get that guy from Kansas City to come, who's never left Missouri, he comes to New York and he's now asked, what do you think about this? And what do you think about this? I will guarantee you that every piece that guy selects is going to be the first piece that he's going to sell.
And because LaBelle even told that story in one of his vignettes in our interview.
Well, and again, I mean, sadly we're all the old timers now, but I guess we all went to the same school, and it's very true. And again, we if it's the three of us that are in in that mindset, it definitely was Evans that exposed us to that.
Yeah, without question.
Who doesn't love a rags to riches story? But a rags to riches to collapse story?
There were two Evans furs. The one that climbed to the top of the highest peak, amazing story, and the one that tumbled from that peak decades later. But that's not the tragedy. The tragedy is what happened in between.
They lived the American dream, and they let a lot of people come in and live it with them. And it was a wonderful story until it wasn't.
Coming from a generation that was so driven and willing to work 18 hours a day to be successful, there aren't that many people like that anymore.
They created something out of whole cloth, and he helped kings and queens around the world with their fur coats.
That was the era, I would say, the golden era of department stores and specialty stores.
Genetics loads the gun, but it's the environment that pulls the trigger.
Non-existent parenting, and so they didn't learn how to cope with stresses.
And I just look at the damage that my father created and the things that he has said.
But it certainly caused a significant rift in the family and families, and a number of us didn't communicate with each other for a long time.
You marry into the family, you marry into the business, because that is your life.
Clearly, there were problems.
All right, what do you got? Tell me something about working for one of the parents of somebody that's more our generation and whatnot.
Okay, so Eddie Jonas's dad, who literally became, my father, we lived in the same development. When I first moved to Chicago, we lived in Arlington Heights. Okay. I moved to my father's apartment. I didn't spend much time. My father was remarried. He had two little kids, and it just wasn't, I was 18 years old, and he had, like a 12 and a 10-year-old, stepchild. And it just wasn't the place where I wanted to be. So, I made my sojourn out of there very quickly. But during the couple of months that I did live there, Lenny Jonas, Eddie's dad, who was the manager at the Woodfield store, Lenny was a neighbor.
And when? 77, 78-ish, somewhere in there?
It was 1970. It was 77 when I moved there.
Okay.
But the key is, my dad was sort of friendly with him. And we would see each other. My first mission was in Chicago, working in downtown Chicago. But it was like 4 months later that they send me to Woodfield.
Is this before you went to Merrillville?
This is way before. This is in the beginning when I first
got there.
When I first got to Chicago, Anyway, to make a long story short, I was asked to go and be the vault boy in Woodfield. And it was, to me, an 18-year-old kid, I thought to myself, I didn't have the mindset of thinking it's cool because I don't have to travel 3 hours a day, and I'll be at home with my friends to enjoy my time. After all, I'm 18 years old, and I didn't realize that in Chicago, although I was locked in a room, on the 5th floor, everything was happening out of Chicago. So as long as your eyes were open, you were a part of it. And again, you- well, exactly. However, I was blessed because I got a guy like Lenny Jonas that took me under his wing. And Lenny, much like the story that you tell about my dad, basically telling you express yourself, but listen to what's going on around you because these people know. Lenny was one of those people too. And I mean, to me, he was the master of retailing because I saw him do things that were like so weird. We would be getting ready for a sale. And I would, as the vault boy, I mean, I'm bringing out all the coats and I'm making sure everything's locked up and I'm making sure every hanger is, in order and everything is ready for us to serve these people. And Lenny would come and he would move stuff around and like shake things up. And I was like, Lenny, I just fixed that. I mean, I just made it look presentable. I says, we haven't even had a customer in yet. He goes, I want that first customer to think that there have been other customers in and they got it grabbed now. And you know what? I watched it happen. And like I say, he really was my mentor. And there was this one night where it was
You seem to have had a lot of one nights and one times at Evans.
because you know what? I was doing a lot of drugs at the time, and that's all I could remember. But no. There was this one night where Lenny was also, one of these great guys who would be like, okay, I'm in the store, I'll close up, you guys can go home. And basically sent, like the ready to wear department, the entire ready to wear department home. And it was just Lenny and I in the store to close. And in those days, we had those loop locks that you had to, make sure. Now, everything on the floor was, was out and it was locked up except for two rolling racks, not rolling racks, what do they call them? The round.
The rounders, yeah.
The rounders. Oh, T-stands, we would have just let them go. This was rounders. So these two guys come in that were, I mean, number one, I'm 18 and Lenny is 60 plus. I mean, Miami Vice was popular at the time. We weren't Tubbs and Crockett. We looked more like Dumb and Dumber. And we were because these two guys come in and we're ready to try and sell them something. And they just want each one. We had Blue Fox jackets that were, surrounding and anywhere from, the 3/4 of a skin jacket. Today they make, they use more to make a hat. But, we had those and we had, another rack that had better ones. And these guys,
So most of them didn't warrant the extra expense of having the lock on.
they didn't have the lock. That's not saying.
Warranted either.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have more in employee pilferage in one code than you will, in losing all of these. However, again, not the brightest of thoughts, but they literally and these were big guys. And Whitfield, you remember, like you can go out of our front door. We were one of the anchors. We were right next to Lord and Taylor. You can go out the front door and be out in the parking lot in 50 yards. And these guys, they weren't carrying footballs. I mean, they were carrying 15, 20 coats apiece, but they ran like Walter Payton. And here's Lenny and I, well, actually, Lenny was the one that led the charge. And I'm thinking to myself, what are you doing? What are you doing? And as I'm doing that, I'm running after, And the two of us literally ran out. There was a car waiting for them. And we literally ran out of the mall, left the store wide open. He was the only one with the keys. I mean, we didn't close it. And we're running in the parking lot trying to get, a license plate. It was, like I say, was exciting times, but it wasn't, it wasn't the smartest of decisions. But what it proved to me was that, people worked, people cared. It wasn't, you didn't think about yourself, you thought about Evans. Certainly that was what Lenny did. And
How do you sell your senses after that kind of a situation? You go, I probably shouldn't have done that because I could have.
well, I could remember Lenny. Lenny used to have, I don't know what it really was, like high blood pressure or something, where he would get nosebleeds sometimes. And you knew Lenny, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Have you? Lenny was this tall and slanky guy, and he was just probably the most relaxed New Yorker I've ever met in my life. And he'd be working with a customer, and I guess the excitement of sometimes having a customer, especially if it was in the summer, it was like he go, uh-oh, and he'd run into the back, and he'd get a nosebleed. And he had it down to a science where he could take a tissue and literally stop the bleeding. He'd sit in his chair like this with his arm up, and he'd go, "Oh, sorry, collection," and then get up, and he'd go out, sometimes with that bloody with the bloody, tissue in his nose. But again, it was all about dedication. It was like you were there to do the job. Nobody ever looked at their watch and said, "Oh shit, it's 9 o'clock. I gotta go home." It's 9 o'clock. Let's prepare for tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. Kids, that is the golden rule of retail today, not to break, because you would probably get killed. See crooks out into the parking lot. So
My dad said this is a pretty interesting thing because you disregard a lot of things your parents say, but it turns out they had some wisdom. My father said, I said, Dad, Evans, why would I go there? He goes, you will learn, son, you will learn. And so I worked for Coslo's in Dallas, which was owned by Evans at the time. They had just acquired them, and they sent me to the executive training program. So that's how I got involved with Evans. They did a lot of things better than anybody, and they did some things that weren't so good. And I learned a lot from the training program. I thought they did a great job with it, and a lot of that detail oriented and following processes and accuracy and things like that. I owe it to that training program. From everything from how to deal with people to the nuances of we had voicemail and email back in the late 80s when no one else did. We were pioneers with BDS in the same building that we were in.
And quite an operation they had too. Remember that with that whole room of computers, servers and everything? Wow.
We can do the same thing on an iPhone now.
Yep.
Trust me on this one. I remember, both of my sons came to work for me at Dicker and Dicker of Beverly Hills. There were two reasons. Number one, at the time, the business was delightful. I mean, it was a beautiful business. You're making money. To me, it was never like working. And I thought that I wanted to share that, as my legacy with my kids. And, at the end of the day, I'll never forget my dad telling me that I need to find a career because I was lost. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And, as a teenager. And he says to me, Larry, you got to find a career. The goal is to find a career where it doesn't feel like work, something that you love so that, it's not like work. And that's what the fur industry was for me. So again, I wanted to share it with my kids. The first thing I ever exposed them to was a framed, not a photo, a framed image that was my mission statement. And it was just one point. And that mission statement was always look to double your customer base. And my kids said, what does that mean? And I said, okay. So now at the time, I was operating from our warehouse, which was where we had, all the inventory processing and distributing from there and cleaning and, all of the major services were out of there. And, we were busy. We were getting deliveries every day. I was getting customers coming in. The mailman, whoever it was, that door, I had you had to open it up. It was a man cave, or what do you call it? A man door, where you have to open it because we were robbed a couple of times.
Yeah.
So you had to let somebody in, and like my kids would go, oh, it's the mail guy or it's UPS, and I would say, my mission statement was again, always look to double your customer base. And I tried to give them the understanding of what that means. If somebody comes in and they want to sell you something, or if somebody comes in and they want you to sell them something, or if somebody comes in and needs to use the bathroom, give them a good experience. And you know what? When they leave, whether they bought or not, they're going to tell somebody. If you give that person a bad experience, they're going to run out and tell 10 people. So, it's easier to build one at a time.
All right, so let's go from one F to another F, and no, I don't mean that one. I mean food. So earlier you told us about your Mike Lerman stories and traveling around with food, and when we got off the call, I kind of felt bad because I was like, that's not just Mike Lerman. When I look at my experience at Evans, here, I made a little list. Cinnabon. I went there all the time amongst, the most fattening things I could have eaten on the planet. And it showed after a while. Okay. Let's see what else.
Yeah, but at least you licked your fingers before you went back to help people.
The Great Steak and Fry Company was new back then, and they and I was eating that crap all the time. It was so damn good.
Well, remember, we were in retail. We were in malls. It was all easily accessible.
Yeah, but I'm sitting there saying, well, we were making fun of the big guy, but the only thing different between us and him was size. Okay, how about the Palmer House for fish fry every Friday where all you can eat?
Well, you know what I remember best about the Palmer House was Monday through Friday, where they had a happy hour, and I was single. So their happy hour, you'd think, oh, fancy guy going to the Palmer House. I'd have 2 cocktails, and they had hot hors d'oeuvres. Okay. So I would go in there at 5:30 after work, and there was a group of, well, probably half a dozen of us, that would, I'll say the group of younger people, because the average age at that time, this was probably 1980. The average age, no, it was probably 1982. the average age of, the associates at Evans was like hospice, you know. It was just a few, of us youngins, and out there. And like I say, I was single. It used to be I'd go to the Cumberland Farms and get a turkey sandwich and have a couple of beers. That was my dinner. And then I realized, wait, I can go have a couple of cocktails and some nice little quiche and, like hot hors d'oeuvres. And that became the meeting grounds, for a lot yeah, I guess food became of my association with Evans. Not always good either.
How about the deli on it was either the 5th or the 7th floor of that old building under the L tracks, a couple of blocks down on
On Randolph.
Randolph and Wabash, yep.
Yeah, yeah. And then do you remember the Cajun place? And yeah, I guess it was Cajun. I'll tell you, Sharon Bass, she was the best navigator of lunch meetings, because you not only went, you said, oh God, a lunch meeting, we ate good at the lunch meetings, she knew that city in and out. She made a lot of us Mike Lerman like.
And then let's not forget the holy grail of them all when we really wanted to stuff our faces at lunch, the Italian Village.
Well, you know what? I wish you didn't say the Italian Village, because that is the place that I adored most and ended up hating, because that's where I learned. I was in Chicago. It was Christmas time. It was December 22nd. And I had a meeting with Robert and Sharon and, the buying group. And we all were going out for an Italian, for a Christmas lunch. And we get to the restaurant and Robert gets paged. And then I see he turned white. And then he called me and Freddie Handel called me over to the phone. And I learned that my father died. So, and I really loved their eggplant parmesan. But
they didn't do anything for you to hate them. It's just those sad memories.
Yeah, I couldn't go back there. I just couldn't go back there. In retrospect, I wish I would have taken it to go, but that's a whole different story.
How do I feel about it today? Looking back on those days? Well, it's coming up on 30 years ago, and it still seems like yesterday. It was truly the best of times and the worst of times. So, in 1949, the year the market crashed, my great uncles started one fur store that they grew into many, becoming the largest retail specialty outerwear company in the U.S. They brought my grandfather in shortly after he married their sister, and he brought my father in for a short time before my parents' divorce. It was kind of predetermined for me. I think the one thing that sticks out for me, different from all the other legacy employees I worked with there, who were following in their parents' or grandparents' footsteps as well, is that my family, lives were lost because of the stress of it all, because of our connection to this. We were just a group of wannabe business people growing up with hope in an industry that was about to smack us down before we could get there. So, combined with my own personal regrets, that's what lingers for me. Beginning in the early 80s, there was a pending sense of doom, but desperation settled in over every move we made, every conversation we had. In our hearts, I think many of us now, we'd admit that we felt it coming. And for me at least, no amount of fun, alcohol, or drugs could mask what was going on, and there was plenty of it all. It challenged the human spirit day in and day out, and was unlike anything I'd seen before or have seen since. I don't know if I'd say we flew too close to the sun, because if that was the case, we would have burnt up a lot sooner. We pulled every gimmick we had out of the playbook to try and reverse course. From sales to celebrities, none of it worked. Our plane was in an irreversible tailspin. The first time, it was just a handful of protesters outside on Black Friday, but you felt protected by the physical barrier of the store itself. By the time they were chaining themselves to the racks and handcuffing themselves to the fixtures, we knew we were sunk. Our passion for what we did paled in comparison to their commitment to their cause. Lessons learned? Well, we all now know that when you get to the top of the highest peak, there's only one direction that you can go. All right, give me something that you did for food, or more Woodfield, or ending up in. You seem to end up in bars. All right,
All right, so I'll tell you, while we're on the subject of food, I have to tell you a couple of good ones from Asia. So again, food was a very big part. It didn't matter what continent you're in. So there was Evans again was the most highly regarded and respected player in the fur industry in Asia. I mean, really to the tune of, it's no bullshit. There were parades. There were, the welcoming committee. They would have the entire city, because some of the factories that we did business with basically fueled the city that they were in, so it was, like the staff. But at the end of the day, they couldn't do enough for us, in their minds. And I learned this when I was sent as Evans representative, in Asia. It's like they know they can't give you anything. They can respect you. They could, give you thanks. They could give you praise. They can give you prayer, but they're not going to give you. It's not like doing business in New York and, looking. Oh, there's $50 in the pocket, and then the guy would say, "Oh, that's not enough." This was different. So what they would do is they would respect us when the group would come in. They would throw these banquets at the most exclusive and exotic and really, honoring us as a company and as people. And there was speeches and there was a lot of drinking, and they would drink like gasoline, and it worked. I mean, everybody would get buzzed, and it was always a good time. I remember being in Hong Kong, and there were probably David was there, Robert was there, my father was there, Bob LaBelle, I believe, was there, Stuart was there, Freddie was there, Jim Leitz was probably there. I think Tommy was there from New York. It was like anybody part of the buying team. I think it had to do with oh yeah, it was during the time that American Express was being shown that they were coming to Hong Kong. So, the whole group was there to perform that or to prepare for it.
So for people to know what that is, we had a deal with American Express where you got your credit card statement, and it was an ad to sell a fur, and we sold a shitload of furs that way.
Well, now for nothing, it was most of the ones that we sold were the ones that the guy stole from Woodfield. Anyway, that was our biggest number. The no skin blue fox jacket or something like that. Anyway, we are now hosted by probably the most respected businessman in Hong Kong, who actually was probably the most westernized businessman in the fur industry. And he became literally my dearest friend when I spent, I spent 8 years in total living in Hong Kong. He was literally my dearest, closest confidant and friend. and Henry's son. It was called Hong Kong Fur. And he wanted to do something for David. David also at the time, I think, became like the president of FICA. And Henry was so involved. Henry was sort of like or Hong Kong Fur was the Evans of Asia. Henry took the business to the umpteenth level from his dad. And, it's a very similar story. And he was just the nicest man in the world. And he arranges for I think I told you a story when David and David, it was right, the pigeon restaurant.
Right.
This was the same host. Anyway,
He didn't forget his keys this time, lose his keys this time, though.
no, and we were in Hong Kong. I mean, we didn't but then we had to drive like to the border of China for that. That's why his wife wasn't so happy having to come out and bring the keys. But anyway, we're in this restaurant that if you could just imagine, it was like a city block of tables and all, sort of most of the restaurants there were like family style. We got, 10, 12 people around the table. And the Lazy Susan does play a very important role in a Chinese restaurant. Well, we were in this room that was an exclusive private room. And it was one of those rooms where it was like just all red velvet. It was just the most luxurious, exotic Chinese setting. And like I say, this was a 10-course Chinese banquet meal. And the first course is brought out, and it was a presentation like you thought that you were at the Ritz-Carlton. They bring it out and they open up the thing and they put it down, and there's literally, it's like you're looking at it, what the hell is it? I mean, at least it wasn't moving, but you look at, you asked what it was, and your answer from your host was, oh, it's a delicacy. Okay, what animal did it come from?
What part of the animal?
All right, so it's a delicacy. It's a delicacy. Everybody picks it up. Chopsticks is not like a fork where you can just push things around and make it look like you're eating. You have to lift that shit and put it in your mouth. Anyway, everybody is sitting there and, they have all these wonderful sauces to dip it in. You're dipping it in the sauce and you end up putting it in your mouth. And that's when Henry said, it's duck. Do you like it? And everybody, it's duck tongue. And then literally, you saw the chopsticks go down. You saw the duck tongue sucked in. And one by one, everybody's getting up and running to the bathroom. Now, I got to tell you, this restaurant, I think they served 1,000 people at a time. They had a men's room that must have had 50 urinals, just in a row. And you'd look down, there was a duck tongue in like 12 of them, the first 12. All right. And everybody, we're all laughing about it. And we get back to, and again, you're drinking. So it's sort of fun. Now we get back to the table and the second course comes. This, again, a delicacy. I don't think the host was even able to identify it. So we're drinking and we're eating, just putting it in our mouth. And one by one, we'd get up and go into the bathroom. And it was like after about, they literally served 10 courses. And understand that there were at least 2 shots between every course. So everybody was just laughing and shit-faced and happy and hungry. I mean, we were hungry, but I mean, you get up, there was like literally every urinal was filled with a Chinese banquet or at least 7 courses of it. I'm sure that the host thought that we all had colitis or something because we spent most of the evening was spent in the bathroom just disposing of the food. And I'm not talking about the normal way.
China. So I think the first I went with David, Walter, and Aaron. Oh, maybe Bobby. was there too, because I have pictures of him and I on the Great Wall. We went out. When you were David, you worked, but you also got to do a little extra curricular activity. There were no cars. Literally, we stayed at the hotel. You stayed in your clothes. It was like horrible. There were no restaurants. Only the government restaurants at Peking Duck number 1, number 2. Terrible. It was freezing. There was no heat. The people on bicycles. You'd go out. The Chinese people. You'd say, "Hey," something. "We do not speak to foreign devils." This is what they say right to me. "We do not speak to foreign devils." No. This was like in the Forbidden City. So, all right, then China. So then I'm trying to went there for a few years. You couldn't buy anything. When we first used to go to Korea, the highway from the airport into town had metal stanchions because, you know why? In case the war broke out with North Korea, they used those highways for runways. And they had a curfew. You had to be in your hotel by 11 o'clock, no matter who you were, or you were arrested. There were armed guards all over the street. Then same story. Went back to Korea, and they're totally like worse traffic than New York City.
The strength of a family, like the strength of an army, lies in its loyalty to each other. Mario Puzo. In every conceivable manner, the family is a link to our past, bridge to our future. Alex Haley. In 1912, Julius Meltzer left Belarus to join his brothers in Philadelphia. It wasn't long before he summoned his wife Rose and their 4 children, which would soon grow to 6, to join him. By 1929, with their mother Rose retired to bed to stay, the oldest daughter, Thelma, was sent to finishing school to learn to help care for the family. 2 of the boys were on their way to star law careers, and the other 2, led by A.L. Mel Meltzer, who later brought in brother Herman, were building what would become the first Furrier in America to become a public company before falling prey to time and generational shifts. Because tragedy, both personally and professionally, was lying in wait and checking in for an extended stay. Decades. And the Meltzers, beginning in 1936, would never be the same again. The tragedy train stayed in the station, even though very prosperous times for the remaining siblings were afoot. But money doesn't care who has it, and the Meltzer clan would be struck down again 30 years later, and then again almost 30 years after that. 2 of the children and a great-grandchild of Rose and Julius Meltzer were victims of suicide. Coincidence? Epigenetics? Generational tyranny? Will we ever know? However, a deep sense of sharing existed between surviving siblings, the bond deeper than the average set of sibling relationships, formed under tremendously difficult upbringings, all of which led to various children, grandchildren, nieces, and nephews all joining Evans Furs at one time or another, including myself, where I began as a stock boy in 1975 and worked in various locations around the country for the company until 1995.
Don't worry, you didn't miss it.
On the next episode of the Companion Podcast, in support of the film Skin on Skin, the rise and fall of the world's largest furrier.
And it got to the point where those guys were going over so often that it was time to put somebody over there.
Did whatever they possibly could to treat us to their country. What they did, they took the thing and they just cut it with a scissor. Instead of butchering it, it was just cut with a scissor. And it wasn't like a kitchen scissor. It was like, some kid's scissor. Can you sew it by hand? I said, it's really important. And she says she'll do it. P.S. I tell him, I was the one that was there talking to him. And I even went on to tell him that, and I was so nervous, Scott, but I went on to tell him, I said, this is not the first time that I've met you. And I went on to tell him about.
On the next episode of the Companion Podcast, in support of the film Skin on Skin, the rise and fall of the world's largest furrier.